Chapter 19 Among the Philistines. Every day since the arrival of the three angels was recorded by Eleazar, under Abraham's instructions. The knife remained at the base of the oak tree, as a reminder of when the deed would happen. 12 new moons, or 360 days, there were in 1 year, and much could happen in so short a span of time. Once Abraham returned home to his tents after the destruction of the cities of the plain, life carried on as usual, with the days being counted down until the time of the next year. But there were plenty of things to occupy the mind of Abraham. Within a month, news came to him of the death of Mamre, lord of the Amorites. He had died a good old age and had, in accordance with his last wishes, given some gifts to Abraham of what few things of value he had. Abraham was sorely grieved at the loss of so powerful an ally and friend. More and more, it felt in his heart that the longer he lived, the lonelier he became as his family, servants, and allies died off one by one. Into his mind he recalled what Noah had said about the weariness of life. While he had yet something to live for, he told himself over and over he was perhaps more sympathetic to the old patriarch now than he had been all those years ago. The next month more bad news came to the camp of Abraham. Aner and Eshcol, brothers of Mamre, had also died. While he had only a cursory friendship with them, through their brother, their deaths were no less cause for alarm and concern for the aged Hebrew. For one thing, Abraham was now utterly alone. Lot was alive, but there had been no word of him. And now that the Amorite chieftains were dead, Abraham was the sole lord of his camp, and utterly alone with no equal in the area. More than this, the covenant that he had made between the Amorites was over, now that they were dead. Furthermore, the Amorites were less in number after the War of the 5 Kings. If Nimrod came again to attack the land of Canaan, they could not provide any substantial defense for him against that or any enemy. So it was that another meeting was gathered in the tent of Abraham. He had the prominent place with his staff in his hand. At his right hand was Sarah, and at his left hand was Ishmael, with his mother Hagar after him. Eleazar, the chief servant, sat on the rug of the tent before his master and his family. With them also was a maidservant, whose name was Hannah. Aside from Hagar, who had the distinct honor of being Abraham's mistress, Hannah was now elevated to the position of Sarah's personal maidservant.
"We must leave this land soon," Abraham said. "The destruction of the cities of the plain have driven away all the people from this region. They will likely fear to come here and trade with us. Moreover, I have heard that the lands have grown barren and dry to the east. There will be no food or water for our flocks and herds. Also, we are without allies in the event of war."
"My lord," Hannah spoke up, "is not the Eternal my master's shield?"
"Yes, that he is," Abraham nodded. "But with allies we can teach them about the Eternal, and so do much good in the land. Now then, we must decide where to take our camp."
"We could go to Mizraim," Hagar suggested.
"No,"
Abraham dismissed with a shake of his long white beard.
"No, we have already suffered from going there before. We must remain in the land of promise, the land of Canaan."
Sarah gave Abraham a sly smile. It pleased her to see her lord gainsay Hagar before the other servants. "My lord father," Ishmael spoke up. He was 13 years of age, and therefore considered a man, and could speak in such circumstances. "What about the land of the Philistines? It's close to us, and the Philistines are strong and mighty. None dare to challenge their authority. With them we will be safe."
"My lord," Eleazar said to Abraham, "no offense meant to the young master, but there are things to consider. The Philistines may be powerful, but they are extremely hostile towards foreigners. As far as we know, they do not know the Eternal." "All the more reason to share the Eternal with them," Abraham added. "We failed to do so with the Amorites. We may as well do better with the Philistines. As for their hostility, that may not be true."
Ishmael chuckled. "No truth among slaves, eh, my lord father?"
"Be silent,"
Sarah chided.
"He is not your servant to correct."
"Not yet," Ishmael retorted.
He is more honorable than you will ever be, you little brat, Sarah snapped. Don't speak that way to my son, Hagar replied defensively, putting her arm across Ishmael as if to shield him from her mistress. He is the son of a slave, Sarah stated, her dark eyes glaring at Hagar. She would have burned a hole through her maidservant if she could. And as such, Eleazar is his elder. It would be well for him to show less insolence. Please, Eleazar interjected. There is no need to quarrel on my account. I am only a servant and not worth the trouble. Don't talk that way, Sarah commanded. Please, everyone, Abraham interjected. I did not mean to disparage Eleazar. I only said that the report of the Philistine hostility might not be true because we encountered the same in Mizraim. It may behoove us to give our future hosts the benefit of the doubt. They all nodded in agreement. Now, let us all prepare for the journey southward. We will be camping west of Beersheba, on the borders of the land of the Philistines. Eleazar bowed and departed, with Hannah doing likewise before departing herself. Hagar and Ishmael awaited the order to be dismissed, which Abraham gave them. He then turned to Sarah, who was still seated in her place. What has gotten into you, my love? He asked. You were never this aggressive before. Ishmael is too arrogant for his own good, Sarah replied. Have you not told him that he won't be your heir? Abraham sighed and hesitated to answer. Well, have you not told him? Yes, I have, Abraham sighed ruefully. He didn't like bringing up this subject. It doesn't sound as though your words have had much effect on him, Sarah commented. He has no right to mistreat Eleazar, your right hand. Sarah, please, Abraham sighed. This is not a pertinent matter. It most certainly is, Sarah returned. If you don't clearly remind Ishmael that he is not your heir, he is going to continue to act as though he is. Abraham made as though he would reply, but had learned after almost 50 years together with Sarah, a whole jubilee, that it was futile to argue with her. As far as Ishmael went, it was a touchy subject for Sarah. She had been the one to suggest his birth, but did not quite enjoy how his mother Hagar had become so defiant and arrogant as a result. More than this, she was bitter that her servant had spurned her when she had been naught but good to her, as far as she knew. But there was more to it than merely her own maternal struggles. Ishmael was a constant reminder to Sarah that she was barren, and that it was not Abraham's fault that they had no children. Very well, he said at last after a lengthy pause. I will tell him and his mother again. You have my word. Sarah smiled and kissed Abraham's cheek. The very next day, the servants took down their tents and loaded the caravan for the journey south. As it was true that the servants of Abraham's house had died and new ones were born, so it had been for the herds. Many generations of sheep, long-haired goats, camels, cattle, and donkeys had passed in the time from Padan to now. Yet despite all the sacrifices, the number of the flocks rarely decreased in any drastic way. The Eternal had truly blessed Abraham in this regard. It was the flocks that Abraham examined as he led the caravan south and west towards the land of Gerar. He marveled at how they had increased over the years. Though Sarah doubted, he remained steadfast in the hope that he would have a son to whom he would give all of this too, and to whom the Eternal would establish an everlasting covenant. Then again, his promise to Sarah came back into his mind. He had to tell Ishmael what his fate would be. Yet it was not easy for him to do so. He had already done it once, and it felt like a great betrayal. While he saw how it could be easy for Sarah to be so dismissive of the boy, it was much harder for him to do the same. Ishmael was his son. He looked back and called for Ishmael to come to the front of the caravan. Ishmael! The young lad did so, and Abraham spoke to him from the back of the camel while Ishmael walked on the ground beside him. How do you fare, my son? Abraham asked. Well enough, my lord father, Ishmael replied.
I hope there is plenty of game in this place we are going. I need something to hunt, to test my skills against. Abraham chuckled.
I'm sure there will be plenty of game in Gerar. You will provide much meat for the whole camp. He then sighed. My son, it is good that you're so skilled with your bow.
I do what I can for the camp, my lord, Ishmael replied. Everyone pulls their own weight, just as you taught us.
Yes, I did, Abraham said, a smile on his face. I am pleased that you haven't forgotten my lessons. You will need them one day.
My lord?
Yes, my son.
Why does the lady hate me?
Abraham looked curiously at the young man. What do you mean? Sarah doesn't hate you.
I know she does, Ishmael replied. I can see it in the way she stares at me, and how she speaks to me. But why? Am I not your son?
Yes, you are my son, Abraham confirmed.
Then why doesn't the lady show me the respect I deserve?
My son, it is a very complicated matter, Abraham answered.
What's so complicated? Ishmael asked. I am your son. That makes me your heir. I deserve the respect of my position.
Abraham sighed. My son, you have no position.
What do you mean?
You are the son of a slave, and one who has offended Sarah.
But I'm also your son.
You were not chosen, Abraham admitted.
By who? Ishmael asked. Who did not choose me?
The eternal God, Abraham replied in reverential tones.
Isn't he the one who made you cut my manhood? Ishmael retorted angrily.
It is the sign of the covenant.
Why not an ear, or a finger, or an eye? Something less precious than my own manhood.
It is not a laughing matter, my son. We do as the Eternal commands us.
What if I don't like it?
It is not for us to question, only to obey.
At this, Ishmael lowered his head dejectedly. Do you not love me, Lord Father?
Of course I do, Abraham returned. You are my son, and nothing can change that. But your path is a different one, no less honorable. You will be freed and become your own man in time, and all the knowledge and skill that you have will be needed in that day, when you become a prince in your own right.
Ishmael looked back up at Abraham. Do you really mean that I will be a prince?
The Eternal has promised it.
With that, Ishmael asked to be dismissed, which his aged father was more than willing to oblige. He then ran back to his mother and told her that he was going to be a prince. She chided him for being so easily pleased, and remonstrated him for not getting Abraham to enumerate verbally that he would be his heir and nothing less. After a full day of travel, they came to the arid region of Gerar, where they pitched their tents. Rather than incite trouble, as it had been before in Mizraim, Abraham decided to meet with the Lord of the Philistines at once and petition him to sojourn in his land. Therefore, he had a small company prepared for his departure, leaving the camp in the hands of Eleazar. His retinue consisted of himself, Sarah, Ishmael, Hagar, and a small number of servants bearing gifts, with which he hoped to garner the favor of the Philistine king, whose name he heard was Abimelech. As it was coming on towards evening, Abraham's retinue approached the walled city of the Philistines. While they were making their way towards the king's palace, Abraham leaned over to Sarah's camel and spoke to her.
If anyone asks, tell them that you are my sister, and that I am your brother.
What? Sarah asked. Are we truly doing this deception again? Did it not bode ill for us in Mizraim when we did this thing before the Pharaoh, and now you're asking me to do it again?
Yes, please, Abraham replied. These people don't look friendly, and as I've heard, they do not worship the Eternal. It is best to play it safe.
Sarah sighed. Very well, but I am not getting into a chest again. I didn't approve of it the first time, and now at my age I'm hardly able to do such foolishness. With these plans set forth once again, they arrived in the courtyard of Abimelech's palace. It reminded Abraham of his father's house in Ur. The king's servants took the reins of his camels as he and his family were ushered past the guards with their helmets of dyed horsehair, down the open-air courtyard and into the audience chamber. It was very similar to the throne room of the pharaoh, but of less grandeur. The king, a large man with dark hair and a thick, braided black beard, sat upon a throne of several steps at the far side of the room. In accordance with the custom, Abraham and his family were brought a certain distance and told to halt and bow in respect. Here, the king spoke to them.
"Are you Abram the Hebrew?"
he asked.
"My name is Abraham, your highness,"
the old patriarch replied.
"By one name or another," the king replied. "Are you the one who broke the might of Amraphel and Chedorlaomer almost 25 years ago?" "Yes, your highness,"
Abraham nodded.
"I am the very same man." "And you have changed your name as well?" the king asked,
a bemused look on his face as he cast his eyes at Ishmael.
"It was said that Abram the Hebrew was a sterile old mule. You truly believe that adopting this waster off the street and calling him your son merits calling yourself the father of kings?"
Ishmael scowled and would have lunged at the king had not Hagar restrained him.
"This lad is Ishmael, born of my handmaiden Hagar,"
Abraham said, gesturing to the woman at his left-hand side.
"He is the son of my body as well." "Is that so?"
asked Abimelech.
"He bears the likeness of his mother more than his father."
His eyes fell upon Sarah.
"And who is this fair woman at your right hand?" "This is my sister, Sarah,"
Abraham replied. At this, Abimelech rose up from his throne, walked down the steps, and, standing before Sarah, lifted her chin up so that he could gaze upon her. In one swift moment, he seized her headscarf and tore it off her head, letting her silver hair fall freely upon her shoulders.
"By Dagon's tail,"
Abimelech announced,
"never before has there been a woman of years of such great beauty."
He then turned to Sarah.
"Is this companion of yours indeed your brother?"
"Your Highness, it is as you have heard," Sarah tactfully replied.
Abimelech smiled. "This is a wonderful thing. So rare a jewel must not be lost. She must surely be the wife of a king." He then turned to Abraham. "You will be the brother of a king, and so elevated far beyond your station. Ask for anything, and it shall be given you." "Your Highness," Abraham stated, "we only came here to sojourn and to make an alliance. It is enough that my people be allowed to stay in the land of Gerar and tend to our flocks and herds." "That is too meager a gift for the brother of a king," Abimelech returned. "We will surely give you much more than this."
He clapped his hands and had the servants take Sarah away and prepare her for his bedchamber that night. He then dismissed Abraham and the others, refusing the gifts that they offered him repeatedly. As Abimelech saw it, he deserved to give Abraham presents for bringing such a beautiful woman to his land. While the Hebrew caravan was allowed to pitch their tents in the desert of Gerar, something was happening to the women of the Philistines. Numerous reports came flooding into the palace of Abimelech that women in his kingdom who were upon the birthing stools suddenly ceased to give birth. Shepherds and farmers from the field began to report similar happenings going on among their flocks. For the rest of that day, Abimelech heard complaint after complaint and had no answer for his people, except to speak to the priests of the temple. Hearing these endless petitions for all hours of the day made Abimelech weary and eager for the night, when he would at last enjoy the fruits of his conquest. In the middle of a meeting of his courtiers, Abimelech nodded off while he sat upon his throne. He snorted and opened his eyes. The throne room was empty, and the torches flickered in their brass fittings. On the far side of the throne room there appeared a figure clothed all in black, but whose skin was as pale as the snows of Mount Senir. Even from across the room, Abimelech sensed some dark and menacing presence from this stranger.
"Guards!"
he called out.
"They can't hear you,
The stranger spoke in a cold, grim voice.
nor can they save you."
Who are you?" he asked the stranger.
I am Azazel, angel of death,
The stranger replied.
and you are a dead man.
There was a flash of black fire, and the figure in black had ascended the steps in the blink of an eye. It now stood on the very top step, even with Abimelech. A strong hand seized Abimelech by the hair on the back of his head and pulled back his head. The second hand held a sword burning with black fire that it raised over the king's head, as though he would run him through. Underneath those piercing, intense eyes, Abimelech felt infinitely small and wholly within this angel's power. "Please," he cried out in horror, "please, may I at least know the reason why I must die?"
Because you took the wife of another man into your bed.
The angel replied.
As the Almighty lives, Sarah is the wife of Abraham the Hebrew.
I didn't know she was his wife," Abimelech exclaimed. "He told me she was his sister. She said she was his brother."
Ignorance is no excuse.
The angel replied, raising the sword in its hand to drive into Abimelech's neck. "What about righteousness?" Abimelech asked. The angel paused, a look of uncertainty in the piercing dark blue eyes.
What do you mean?
"Does the Almighty slay the righteous and the innocent?" Abimelech returned. "I have not laid with her, and there was no malice in my heart when I took her." The angel of death halted in its path, then lowered the sword from Abimelech's neck.
The Almighty has seen your heart and knows that you speak the truth. For this reason, he prevented you from sinning with this woman. Return her to her husband, for Abraham is a prophet, beloved of the Almighty, and he will pray to the Almighty that this affliction be taken away from you. If not, then I shall visit you, and all of your people, and they shall die."
With that, the angel roughly released Abimelech's head and departed in a blaze of black fire. A jolt went through Abimelech's body, and he found himself on the floor of his throne room, gasping for breath and surrounded by his courtiers. At once he revealed what he had seen to them. Half of his servants told him to put the dream out of his mind. As they said, dreams were so vague and uncertain and open to interpretation that there was no reason to put stock in dreams and visions. But Abimelech did not heed these placating words. The hand upon his hair and the look in that angel's eyes were very real and substantial, as well as the intense burning flame from the sword in its hand. The other half of the servants were filled with as much trepidation as their lord. Now the reason for the closing of every womb became apparent to the Philistines, and they eagerly sought for remedy. This half pleaded with Abimelech to return Sarah to Abraham, in the hope that maybe the severe malady would cease from their land. This pleased Abimelech, and he had these bring forth Sarah and summon Abraham to his throne room, though it was almost night. From beyond the walls of the palace, the cries of those suffering in the streets of the city could be heard. Abimelech paced the floor at the bottom steps of the throne, waiting for the aged patriarch to appear. At last Abraham appeared, his staff in hand, and bowed before the king. "What evil have I done to you, that you treat me and my kingdom in so cruel a manner?" Abimelech asked. "You have lied to me before my face, and almost brought the shame of cuckoldry upon us, upon both of us. Such things should never be done among neighbors. Well, what have you to say for yourself?" "Your Highness," Abraham replied, "I heard that the fear of the Eternal is not in this land, and I worried that the people would slay me for the sake of Sarah, my wife. It is my custom when sojourning in a strange land." "Entreat the Eternal your God that he save my people from destruction," Abimelech replied. "Do this, and not only will I return your wife to you, I shall give you anything you desire, sheep, cattle, manservants, maidservants. I'll even let you dwell in my land wherever you wish." "How shall I know that my wife is safe and untouched?" Abraham asked. Normally Abimelech would have unleashed his wrath upon anyone who questioned the word of the king. But he was in a dire situation with his people suffering just outside the walls of his palace, as well as the fear and dread of the vision, which still clung to his chest. Rather than explode upon Abraham, he summoned his guards, who brought Sarah out into the king's court. "Here she is," Abimelech said, "untouched, even as she was received into my court. As a pledge of good faith that I never touched her, I shall give you 1,000 silver pieces. Now entreat your God that he spare my people."
Abraham held up his right hand, with his left hand resting upon the staff, and spoke in a great voice.
O eternal God, sovereign ruler of the world, thou hast created man in thy image, that he may increase and propagate his kind. Show mercy now to the Philistines, and grant that Abimelech and his house may multiply and increase.
There was a rushing of wind, and then suddenly the sound of crying ceased, and it was replaced with the noise of rejoicing. Abimelech looked at Abraham in amazement.
Who is this God of yours that has such great power?
He asked.
He is the creator and sustainer of heaven and earth,
Abraham began.
The sovereign ruler of all that is within them both. It was his hand that saved me from the wrath of Nimrod of Shinar when I was but a child. It was he that I learned at the knee of Noah, the builder of the ark that saved mankind from the great deluge. When I dwelt in the house of my father Terah, the kings of the world sought to slay me, but the Eternal proved himself as my Redeemer. When I lived in Padan Haran, and the peoples of the world tried to lead me astray to idolatry, the Eternal revealed himself to me and said, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, and journey to the land that I will show thee.
The story continues in chapter 20.